You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
You know, Thomas, one of the things that we work really diligently on at FDRA is protecting intellectual property. And all I can say is that in my 15 years in this job, and you're almost 10 years within FDRA, the landscape has gotten ever more complex, ever more intricate. And with the rise of direct-to-consumer and e-commerce and the creator class, if you will, with access to consumers directly, it's just the landscape is almost back to the wild, wild west than it was before. And so today we have an expert within the IP space, particularly to what he calls sneaker law, to help us navigate and explore this new dynamic. We may not always agree, but the conversation is going to be robust and friendly and really informative. And so Kenneth Anand, my friend from Sneaker Law, thank you for coming on Shoe and Show. You have so much experience. One glance at your LinkedIn profile and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know when this dude sleeps. But we start off most of our conversations, one, with welcoming our guests, and two, tell us your shoe story. How did you get involved in this industry that we all love and for which you're so effectively serving?
Yeah, Matt and Thomas, thank you for having me on the show. My shoe story is near and dear to my heart. I grew up in Montclair, New Jersey, big fan of hip hop and basketball culture, loved sneakers, dating myself, but the early 90s were, my peak, collecting scene. And I wanted Jordan so bad, but my parents, held out until the Jordan 5 came out, and finally I wore them down and they got me my first pair of Jordans. And since that time, I've been an avid collector and enthusiast of sneakers. So everything from Jordans to Adidas to I went through my Yeezy era, and then now I'm enjoying all the different brands that are blowing up today. So it's an exciting time, and my shoe story continues.
Do you have some favorites? I see you've got a great shoe collection behind you. What are some of your key favorite shoes?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, as an OG sneakerhead, I've always loved the Jordan 1. I feel like it goes with anything. I'm really enjoying the New Balance variety that's out today. Other brands like Asics coming back with some really stylish and cool collaborations. And, of course, other Jordans like the 5s, the 4s, and the 3s are always exciting for me.
And you've got a book on sneaker law. And you've got a course that you teach. You've gotten into law schools, fashion schools. Tell us about that. How did that get started? What was the inspiration behind that, and how's that going?
Yes, thank you for asking. So Sneaker Law is a really passion project for myself and my co-author, Jared Goldstein. We started this in about 2017 when we saw a dearth of information about the business, at least being taught in schools and being taught on a larger scale. And so we set out to write the Bible for the sneaker business. And it was an ambitious project. It took us probably 4 years to complete. And, a lot of that time was concepting and outlining, but it finally was published in the pandemic. And it couldn't have been better timing because schools were looking for exciting things to teach their students and engage them while they were on Zoom. So we did a virtual book tour at nearly 30 plus law schools, colleges, universities, and design schools. And then it just took off from there. It's really become a movement. And we've sort of revolutionized the way entrepreneurialism is taught through the book. It's not just a book about sneakers. It's a book about business and law taught through the lens of sneakers, and students respond really well to it.
I love that because one of the things we talk about in our industry is that most consumers, particularly on the sneaker side of things, come at the industry like, I want to be in the sneaker industry, and the way in, Kenneth, is being a star athlete or just retail. And there's so many more jobs beyond landing, the deal, which none of us will ever land, and just work in the retail space, which is honorable through and through. But all these jobs in trade, supply chain, the movement of goods, particularly in the Black community. And so one of the things we've done with the Black Footwear Forum, and I think you have similar interests is to expand the awareness of what the opportunities are to come in and work in legal compliance, freaking classifications. There are 436 ways to classify shoes coming across our border. There's so many different opportunities within the sneaker space that can allow folks to work for the brands that they love in a creative way and not just go after that sneaker deal that none of us can ever ascertain. So talk to it. Is that part of your passion as well, to expose young people to the opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm just remembering back to the student I once was when I had this desire to find out information and it didn't exist. And so, or it wasn't taught to me in a relevant and enticing way. So we try to highlight the different areas of the sneaker industry, anything from manufacturing, distribution, retail, of course, counterfeiting, law, and just show people that if you have a desire to make it in this business or you love sneakers or footwear in general, there's so many different avenues that you can look to, marketing that might excite you. And just knowing about that stuff is empowering enough. You'd be surprised at the reaction when students come up to us and say, I didn't even know this existed. And that's really been the overall blueprint for my career. It's like I'm blazing paths and trails that didn't exist. And I feel like I have a duty to hand that down and show people where, I had to forge my own way and maybe they won't have to.
Is there anything when you're researching the book that surprised you? I know you got a lot of experience, you have a lot of interest, lifelong in the industry, but is there something that as you're putting this together, you're like, wow, I didn't realize that. That's something that's kind of surprising.
Yeah, I think, we always knew that there were legal cases that were being reported on in the sneaker industry, but kind of quietly. And I think it wasn't until we sort of made this compendium of legal cases in a sneaker law book that we realized that people were extremely interested in the legal underside of the sneaker industry. And now you can't go a day or a week without some case being reported in the news. And we really feel like we had a part in generating that excitement, because the law doesn't have to be boring. It can be presented in a way that's exciting and palatable. And certainly the more we know about the legal side of the business, of the sneaker business, the more we're educated in how it affects our consumerism and everything else.
What about, let's unpack a few the years you're at Yeezy, if that's of interest to you. It's of interest to me for sure, because it was such a dynamic brand at its height. Clearly there's been challenges in the more recent months and years, but at its height, it was such a dynamic brand. There's someone within the company I'm very close with who basically said, look, Matt, we're a multi-billion-dollar company with two shoes at the time. And just, obviously Kanye's allure, his design eye, if you will. But from the legal side, as GC there, what were some of the things that you were dealing with on a day-to-day basis when you were GC at Yeezy?
Yeah, I mean, I got to say that was one of the most exciting times in my career, just to be there and experience that boom and that explosion of the brand. And, you're right. I think two of our core products were sneakers, but to see so much innovation and design and just trailblazing that Kanye did during that era was phenomenal. And I was lucky that I got to be a part of it. On a day-to-day basis, I did what any GC would do, is field, normal legal issues that came up. They might be employment contracts. They might be intellectual property items. They might be filings and deals, commercial contracts. So it was no different, I would say, than other GC roles at sneaker companies, but it certainly was a lot more exciting and definitely a lot swaggier than most companies.
When you're looking at, going back to the book and the class, what made you decide to really focus in on this? I guess when people are looking at this and they're trying to decide what courses to take, why would you say you need a specialized course in sneakers, not just business law? What makes the industry so unique from your perspective? I
will say, just to interject real quick, Tom, I'm the only non-attorney on this call, or within this conversation. Thomas is asking this from experience, so yeah. I'm just a layman.
I would have taken this course, by the way. This is I would definitely this is absolutely so much better than some of the other courses. So, but I'm just curious, what do you tell people? Like, you need to take this. This is not this is not your normal business law. The industry's different. There's so many things that make it. We talk about it all the time, but I'm just interested what you think makes footwear different than apparel or just generally any other industry.
Yeah, well, same. I would have taken this course twice if I could have when I was coming up, and that was sort of the reason why we wrote it. You know, we saw that there really was a void in terms of what people knew about this business, but also the way in which it was taught. We remember Jared and I when we were in law school; it just wasn't appealing to us. It wasn't relevant. Some of these books were extremely dense, put me to sleep night after night, and we didn't think that law had to suck, basically. And so that was the real start of it. And as we started writing it, we realized, well, we can delve into these other areas of the business too, and give people an overall look on the footwear and sneaker industry as a whole. And so the great thing is now people are finding us. Like in the beginning, we were like, "Hey, we've got a book, we've got a book," and you know, now we get calls from universities, colleges, design schools all across the country, and they say, "How can we bring sneaker law here? How can my students learn more about it?" And then we have the casual reader who might not be in school, but has the desire to open their own sneaker business or become a designer and want to take a non-traditional path into the business. And we cover all of that stuff. So they've written to us and they've said, sneaker law has been so helpful and so guiding in my journey. And that's just all we could ask for. Like
That's
if we,
awesome.
yeah, if we touched, you know, only a couple people and they said that to us, we'd be grateful. But it's exploding, and we're actually working on V2 right now, which will come out next year, and we're going to continue that journey and keep updating it.
When that comes out, you know what we should do? Because you're talking to the guys who have to staff the sneaker caucus from the industry perspective. So
Yeah.
we're part of the founding of the sneaker caucus with Congressman Motzkowitz out of Florida on the Democratic side and Chavez Dreamer on the Republican side out of Oregon. You should do a book signing. I mean, think of all the places you should go. It's
Oh,
freaking Capitol Hill with
I
your
would love to.
books. It's like Sneaker Law, the Sneaker Caucus sponsoring Sneaker Law. I think that would be a fun staff briefing, Thomas, don't you think?
No,
Absolutely.
totally. And Jared and I, when we saw that and we saw you guys doing that, we were like, man, we got to get on the Senate floor and do something. And actually, I understand Jamal Bailey, who's here in New York, is a huge sneakerhead. And so
Yeah.
I've been trying to make some things work on the political side behind the scenes. Also, I think that there should be like an anti-bots act for sneakers, like there is for tickets that Obama started during his administration. So we got a lot of work to do on the floor.
That's not a bad play, my friend. We should talk offline and off air
Let's
about
do it.
how we accomplish that. Let's do a general survey of the landscape. So if you wind the clocks back a decade or two, you were not as much D2C activity in the retail space. The bots weren't a thing. There were obviously drops and releases. My first Jordans were Jordan 3s. I had to go to my dad because my mom was the keeper of the checkbook. So my dad was like, yeah, I'll buy you some Jordan 3s. So it was just a different environment from an IP perspective. And then you fast forward to now, and I guess back in the day, if you would go to an illicit market, let's say in New York City or in Beijing, and you knew what you were getting when you're picking up knockoff sneakers. Nowadays, the doors have been blown off. Everyone, you know, you can go to Instagram and easily find sneakers that are knockoffs that look amazing that are coming out of Fujian province in China, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
How are you advising your clients about the current state of the landscape? That's my first question. And then I think from there, let's explore that kind of gray area that I think we operate in, maybe from different sides in a little way, and just kind of talk through that. But let's start off with like the landscape from an IP perspective as it relates to counterfeits and knockoffs globally.
Yeah, sure. So I think we've seen over the last 10 years a number of trends, and one of the biggest ones being retros and the need for IP protection. Like we've seen Nike clamoring to register trade dress for their iconic silhouettes that came out in the 80s, but now have experienced resurgence, and maybe their design patents have expired. So I counsel a lot of my clients on really protecting their IP and making sure that they've got iconic trade dress and trademarks to hold on to over time, because we never know how fashion and its cyclical nature will come back, and all of a sudden a shoe that was no longer popular is worn by every fashion influencer in the game. So that's number one. And then counterfeiting has always been a problem, but you're right. I think we're seeing more and more sophistication at the manufacturing levels, and copycat factories, or maybe even existing factories that are backdooring products, have things that are so so similar to the actual authentic good that it really makes things difficult. What also doesn't help is that we have a community of young sneaker buyers that don't care whether or not they're buying legitimate pairs or quote unquote reps. I mean, the word reps was created to take the stigma off of counterfeits and fakes. It's the same thing. And so, I think we have a general population of youngsters who say, I don't care. I want to get my hands on these limited shoes. And maybe you won't be able to tell they're fakes from my Instagram profile. And maybe you won't see me in real life with these on. But whatever it is, it's become normalized. And I think that's a real problem that the industry is going to have to deal with. So I think those trends are big ones. And I always counsel my clients on, well, let's sit down and see what you have in terms of your portfolio, what you should be protecting, and maybe what's expired that should be updated. And because you never know what might come back.
That was really interesting to me that you're already working on, version 2.0, that we need an update because the landscape's changing and there's so much happening. And I'm just curious too. I was actually going to ask you that about, when is the next version coming out of the book? And so I'm just curious, what has changed over the past couple of years that you say, hey, we need to make a few updates? And, what do you see as the next big issue for the industry?
Yeah, I would say everything's changed. And I think Jared and I sat down and said, wow, look at all these things that have happened since we released this book. And, it's fortuitous for us because it gives us something to keep writing about. But two of the major issues that we're going to be covering and differences between V1 and V2 is V2 will have a whole sneaker technology chapter, which will cover everything from AI to VR, Web3, anything that's happened in the sneaker landscape from a tech standpoint, including NFTs. That happened like maybe the year after we released the book. And so there's a lot that's been going on in that community that we want to touch on. And then the second thing is we're doing a whole chapter called Customs, Copycats, and Counterfeits, which is an expansion of our counterfeit section. And as we saw, just this discussion we're having right now about the difference between reps, counterfeits, the distinctions, and also these copycat shoes, as we saw Cool Kai get sued by Nike, sneakers that are coming out that look similar to iconic silhouettes that may or may not have IP protection. And so that we can guide young designers and young brands on how to steer clear of these IP infringements.
You talked about AI. Where do you see as the opportunities there for the industry and some problems that are going to come up?
Yeah, so I think AI is a wonderful tool for marketing, wonderful tool for copywriting, and for research, initial research, as there's scraping all over the web and finding ways to present you information in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise thought of yourself. I think the complications obviously are copyright. There are courts that have already ruled that AI created works, whether they're visual or textual. There's no copyright protection for those. The copyright rests in the creator of the work, which they believe is the robot. And so how is that going to change? And what's the difference between what I take from the AI output and what I make changes to? And at what point is it copyrightable? And I think that's all being still worked out in the courts. And interestingly, in our AI section of Sneaker Law, we're going to have that section entirely written by an AI platform. And there's going to be a disclaimer that we're not copywriting this section, but we want to show you how effective AI can be, that this one little section in our book has been entirely written by a non-human. So we're excited about that.
There's an irony to that. So let's get into the gray area, because that's where a lot of, we're already there as we talk about AI. There's a site, the exact URL is like thisshoedoesnotexist.com or something, this sneaker does not exist. And it's AI produced sneakers that you can tell are influenced by the scrape across all the different brands that are out there. So there's a New Balance looking shoe or silhouette. It's not quite New Balance, but this AI generated, and quote unquote the sneaker does not exist. Wow. Then you fast forward to some of these other cases where they're creative derivatives from classic products, we'll kind of leave it there from a description perspective. But where are all the demarcation lines, Kenneth? Like, it is just, the Wild West was wild for a reason. The rules no one really knew. They weren't standardized, and we're in that space where, unless the Supreme Court rules in certain cases, or Congress is proactive on AI, which is like an oxymoron that's never going to happen. Where are the demarcation lines for all these different kind of tributaries, if you will, that are running off of IP law?
Yeah, so I think that's going to be dependent on the brands and the IP registrations that they have. So, for example, if there is a derivative New Balance put out by some AI designer, New Balance is going to have to decide whether or not they want to go after that designer and their derivative work. If the designer is just doing it for educational purposes online to show people cool designs on their Instagram page, maybe it's not worthwhile. But if that designer then takes that derivative to a factory and gets a 3D render created, or a foam,
Commercializes it.
yeah, right. Let's say they take it to Zellerfeld or something like that, and next thing you know, they got a pair of shoes on the market, which I call the Kodakization of sneakers, because there was a time when we had digital cameras that made Kodak obsolete. I think we're getting to that point where everybody may have a footwear factory in their bedroom or living room soon one day. It's gotten that easy in terms of 3D printing and modeling. So the question is, at what point does the brand find that it's risen to the level of affecting them commercially that they want to go after them? They can't sue everybody. It's just impractical, and they may not have the resources. But when somebody makes enough noise on Instagram or through social media or through commercial sales on e-commerce platforms, then they might say, all right, well, this is hurting our bottom line. And if we don't protect this IP, it's going to look like we don't police our property and we don't police our trademarks and our trade dress. So it is the Wild West, and brands are already waking up to these things and already seeing people that are going to factories, finding, quote unquote public domain tooling and making their own shoes that look similar to silhouettes that are out there. Using AI to create those things is the start for a concept that maybe a designer can't take to a factory without that.
I think with AI, there's the concern about looking at talent and people that want to enter the industry, and you see certain jobs being displaced. I guess what do you see as some key ways to attract talent and innovation and design into the industry so that we can get even further ahead with the latest and greatest designs? What do you see as some good platforms and opportunities for doing that?
Yeah, well, I think, to our last topic, I think instead of looking at these young, savvy designers as a threat, I think the brands need to embrace them and start bringing them on board. I think we've seen that with Nike hiring Artifact. I think they saw Artifact was completely revolutionizing the way sneakers occupied the Web3, virtual, and NFT spaces. And they said, all right, well, let's just buy this company and we'll put them in-house. And I think we're seeing tons of amazing stuff happen in a very progressive way in terms of design that maybe brands are a little reticent to understand at this point. But why not create a small department within your footwear team and say, this is our AI and Web3 team, and start doing some innovation and getting a handle on it and see what's commercially viable and see where it intersects and maybe is helpful to your brand instead of hurtful. And I think we'll grow from there. I'm sure other brands are already doing it. We've seen collabs between Adidas and Balenciaga in the Web3 space. We've seen NFTs with Prada, and so it's happening. And some brands are slower to get on board than others.
Yeah, I will say this, just as a side commercial for FDRA, we do an intellectual property digest every month. And Kenneth, we have a system. It's all public information. We tell people that all the time, but we mine all the different patent, utility and design patent filings and trademark filings for footwear every single month. And that document is a 75-page document every month. And it's just this, we hyperlink it all to all the filings. It's like, brrr. And if you look at who's filing, it is all the big brands that we know and love, because they are continuously, aggressively staking their claim of protecting their IP. Yeah. And so when you see that, you're like, man, the athletic brands, the sports brands in particular, the innovative brands, they're really aggressive on trying to continue to grow the hedges of their protection further and further out. How does that inform like a new entrant, like an upstart, like a designer himself or herself that wants to protect their IP? How do you, as an expert, advise them on what they should be protecting. What are like the two or three things, trade dress and design, if there's a utility to it. Kind of walk us through filing 101 for a newbie.
Yeah, so it's obviously expensive to file a patent, and it may not be financially feasible for every new designer to file a design patent on a sneaker that hasn't proven commercially successful. But I advise many young creators and designers and upcoming brands that if they want to protect their silhouette or their design that's unique and non-obvious, then they should at least try to get a provisional patent, which gives them at least a year to hold, quote unquote, their spot in line and put a foot down and a stake in the sand that says, I've created this design. I may one day within the next year or so decide to go the full length and file a full patent on this design. But in the meantime, let me just see if this works, and let me get a prototype made, and let me start pitching it, or let me start selling some pairs. And then once I see it's viable and I've made some money, I can go back and reinvest in the full patent. And, again, not everybody can do this, but as you said, there are, hundreds and hundreds of patents being filed on an annual basis, maybe in the thousands, that brands of note and of commercial success are looking to protect, because they see the path. The only way to ensure their commercial success long term is to make sure that they have a design that's not infringed upon. And so, and think about how many design patents are filed that never go anywhere commercially, and maybe fall off the wayside. So I think, IP protection is certainly important, but again, I think the strongest IP that any creator has is their brand. And I think trademarking that and making sure that that's solid first is the most key thing, because we may say, well, I've created a silhouette that looks like this or looks like that, but as long as I've slapped my brand on it and my branding's markedly different than the other company's brand, it's distinguishable in the marketplace and maybe doesn't infringe. So that's a start. But you're right, patents are the next and most important line of defense for protecting your brand and making sure that you have a silhouette that's can enjoy success in the years to come.
Is there any, FDRI represents companies of all different sizes. We've got really big companies. We also have small businesses, family-owned businesses, people that are just starting up shoe companies. So do you have any advice for them? I mean, obviously there's a whole course on this now on sneaker law. There's a book on it, but any tip or just takeaway for the small guys that are trying to start up?
Yeah, I would say the biggest tip is that don't underestimate your power and your influence as a small brand. We've seen small brands in the last 5 or 6 years turn into powerhouses that went public on the stock exchange. So look at Hoka, that are now giving the bigger players a run for their money in the space, especially in running. And so find a niche that you can fill and go hard at it, and you never know what your customer base and how they might respond. So it's never a better time to innovate and to create new products. And I think we're also seeing a diversification of brands right now that maybe once wasn't appreciated. It might have at one time been, the top 4 brands, and now consumers are much more willing to experiment with different companies. So we're seeing the Hokas of the world, the Ons, the Brooks, the Asics come back, and I think that's a very exciting time. We should embrace this opportunity to say, all right, well, what's new and what can we do? And the big companies are going to have to double down on innovation just to stay relevant and to stay on top of mind with the consumer.
That's for sure, man. That is for sure. Well, how does one double down on Kenneth and all the stuff that you're doing? What URL? You're on LinkedIn, obviously. Yeah. Hit him up on LinkedIn. Where else should people go to get in touch with you and with Sneaker Law?
Yeah, so on Instagram, we're at Sneaker Law. We're at Sneaker Law on all social media platforms, but Instagram is probably our biggest one, as well as LinkedIn. And then I'm at Kenneth Taught Me on Instagram. It's just my personal page, and you can stay on top of all the things that I do there. And I'll be at the Black Footwear Forum in September. Mm-hmm. Matt, I hope to see you there. And we get to chill. I love the energy there, and I'm super excited to see Dwayne and the whole team. It's the best event of the year for footwear, I have to say.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. I agree with you. As one who runs a lot of different events, it is the best. So, Kenneth, thank you for coming on, for your expertise, for the way in which you approach the industry. You're doing something that's so sorely needed to help generate the next kind of generation, if you will, of experts in IP and design, development, commercialization, et cetera, et cetera. So thanks for coming on Shoe and Show. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'll see you in Congress.
That you will never see. Oh yeah, we'll go there and we'll do a book signing. That's what we'll do.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, cool. Well, folks, this has been another edition of Shoe and Show where we're really unpacking the business side of the industry. There's a ton of podcasts on design and what's hot and what's not, et cetera. And we love those, right? But we are the one focused on the business side of footwear. And we hope that you download our mini episodes over the last 7 years. They're still germane to this day. We hope you check back in next week and share this episode with a friend. Hit up Kenneth on all the platforms that he talked about. And until next time, Shoe and Show is out.
Shoe-In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.